This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today, I'm speaking with Yarrow Kraner. Yarrow is the founder of Hatch, a global network of influencers committed to progress on pressing societal issues.
The mission statement of Hatch is to connect leaders and organizations to a global community to accelerate relationships and solutions to hatch a better world for all.
Yarrow is a pioneer of social networking for good, and Hatch recently celebrated its 20th anniversary. Yarrow, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Justin.
So tell us, where did you grow up and what did your parents do?
I grew up in Bozeman, Montana from mid-70s onward. My mom and I moved here. She left an abusive relationship when I was 2 years old and left my father and did her undergrad in Minneapolis. And then we came here for her grad school in Bozeman, Montana. And pretty much in and out of Montana ever since. When I was a teenager, I couldn't wait to get out. Just wondered what was on the other side of those big mountains. And now I can't wait to get back, even with all the travel I do.
Indeed. Yet you still stayed in Montana for college, right? Studied film and marketing at Montana State?
I actually first went to Western Montana for football and wrestling scholarship and essentially just wasted a couple of years to figure out that I wanted to get a little bit more serious about school. And during the summer break, wandered through the Montana State University Film School and saw all these huge cameras. And I've been carrying a camera since I was 6 or 7 years old. And it was just an instant aha moment. I was like, oh yeah, this is a real career. You can do this for a living. And went to film school and then started a production company right out of film school and then ended up moving to Los Angeles. I was there for 9 years, did some directing there, and but also ended up starting the company a little bit by accident in 1999.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. What an interesting time with the skill set that you were developing to launch into the internet, into social networking. Talk about that first business and what it was all about.
When I was leaving Montana and going to Los Angeles, I was convinced that I was moving to the epicenter of creative genius and I'd be inspired every day. And I couldn't wait to just be immersed in that. And, a couple of years in, I'm at this Hollywood Hills party looking around and everyone looks almost like the same person, beautiful, dressed in black, looks successful. And I'm like, what am I even doing here?
Right.
And had this moment where I walked outside all by myself on this huge deck overlooking the city lights and kind of the stars above. And just in my head said, where are they? And every day for the next couple of weeks, I met these really exceptionally interesting, extraordinary stories of everyday people doing extraordinary things. When you wonder where these people are that are these real life superheroes in the world, they're all around us. They're in our neighborhoods, they're in our communities, and they're inside each of us. And that was the aha moment where I realized that we're all born with this special gift inside, this superpower. And so made the commitment to go find and connect as many real life superheroes as possible. Not just athletes, entertainers, but teachers and scientists and composers and so on. And we built that from my garage into an actual company from 1999 and 2003 to about 1.5 million people. And we had a whole digital currency called Knowledge Nuggets where we play these games, gather these points. The more knowledge you'd feed your character, the higher you'd rise up on this karma counter, which worked like a stock exchange. And you would unlock all these different real life prizes. So you were motivated to continue to gain knowledge and climb up this karma counter. But there was a bait and switch. Once we had them on the move, there was a prompt that you would get at level 2 that said, how do you really save the world? Start with where you are. Type in your zip code. You type in your zip code and you're given 10 things you can do in a 3-mile radius where you live. And so we helped pioneer this volunteer match engine and we started mobilizing people into their communities. And they would come home with they would upload and fax to us on 2001, proof of their neighborhood cleanup or walking dogs to the Humane Society or reading for the elderly, whatever the case might be. And they would get 10,000 knowledge nuggets and a light bulb would go off and be like, whoa, I could play video games for a month and not get that. And so we started mobilizing people into their communities and that grew. I think we had 10.5 billion knowledge nuggets just from volunteer hours in the year and a half of that program.
It's worth noting the date. I don't want listeners to miss that. 1999, 2000, 2001. This is years before MySpace, years before Facebook were even an idea. You were off and running, trying to make a social network on the internet with a cryptocurrency of a sort embedded within it ahead of your time.
The downfall of being a little bit ahead of the time is that you get a lot of blank stares and you're talking to people who don't quite understand. There's not a precedent for the language yet. And so we were having meetings with big studios and they were interested and curious, but nothing like it existed. And so we got a lot of blank stares. And so in 2003, we got an acquisition offer, which is the same within sort of the several months of the same time that MySpace popped up. We brought the CEO in to help us scale and become acquired. And he's a really smart man. Richard Rosenblatt had a long history with big acquisitions and scaling organizations and companies. And he kept telling me that our branding was too niche. And I pushed back against him. And I was like, there was a humor involved. There was a tongue-in-cheek, not taking itself so seriously. And it was the Hero Project, and we thought it was super dudes and all this lingo that we invented in that moment. His sort of lesson to me was it's not ubiquitous enough for a real expansive online community. And of course, when we got acquired, we got rolled into what started that same year was MySpace. And Richard ended up becoming the CEO of MySpace with that acquisition transaction. I thought we were just getting started. I was pretty crushed actually when we got acquired. And so I came back to Montana to lick my wounds and figure out what was next. It was a precedent for setting the initial social networking platform in motion.
Sure.
The only other online community at that time was something called Neopets. And then in 2002, I think Friendster started. Like, it was something that it took me a while to get over the sting of. And then Hatch was formed as a result of that transaction and acquisition. And I'm so grateful because Hatch has become like this incredible family of people that I otherwise never would have had.
Some of the principles that you outlined in the social network that you and your colleagues were trying to build, connecting people with service actions they can take in their immediate community, it seemed like it was conceived as a force for connecting people in service of doing good in the world. And gosh, what a moment we can have here 20, 22 years hence to reflect on what social networks and probably more appropriately social media became in that intervening 2 decades. Where do you think it went wrong? How did we get here and not in a place where these networks have been harnessed for good?
You know, it really always comes down to revenue models and capitalism. And in the case of social networks and sort of the turning point in which Facebook started becoming one of the most powerful platforms in the world, it was all about harnessing data and affinity and human behavioral trends with kind of mapping against consumerism and advertising and marketing. And so our model was much more innocent and maybe even naive, but it was really around like how to empower people of all ages. At the very end, the part where I started really recognizing that we had something special, that it was even like different than what I originally thought it was going to be, was getting all these letters from child psychologists and parents and teachers talking about the process by which we would move people through the exercise to identify what it is within them that makes them extraordinary, and what are they going to take to the world and share with the world, and essentially their real life superpowers. And the letters would sort of outline that, like, my son or daughter is walking with more self-esteem, straight up and with purpose, and it's been this like significant confidence boost, and it was real fun and joyful. But also I recognize that we all, as we defined what it is within us that makes us this very specific persona, we started becoming those personas. It was quite lovely. But back to your question, like, the modern social network platform is so much about data mining,
surveillance capitalism,
and there are other models. The Social Dilemma, the film that came out recently, there was a very salient line in there. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Yes.
People will be given an opportunity to pay a monthly fee or a subscription to not have their data mined and not be advertised to, because technology also, it costs money to build. So if it's creating value for you, like, I think that the challenge at this point is like how to reshift that paradigm of value so that it's no longer reliant upon the models that need to keep it sustainable, while also really catering to the mental health and well-being and health of humanity.
Yeah, I agree. There are some like fundamental design principles that could hopefully be re-engineered. The changing of the revenue model, the profit model, all those things, like that's fundamental to this. And in many ways, like Facebook is such a money printing operation. It's a real big question as to whether or not they can recreate that revenue generating capability through a subscription model or an alternative model. But I do think we're starting to realize the consequences of the way these networks are structured, and people in policy are starting to just opt out. And maybe market forces will drive these companies to change in a way that we didn't conceive possible just a few years ago.
Even also, I think the destigmatization of mental health and having Olympians and professional athletes being able to step out of their, what otherwise would be sort of a risky venture to put your sponsorships at risk and things like that. People are stepping out and saying, no, like enough is enough. And I need to take care of myself. And I want all of you young people out there to do the same for yourself. And that is also going to have a significant tipping point.
It seems like a good moment to pivot to Hatch. You come back to Montana and you keep your passion for connecting people, and it takes the form of this new venture, Hatch. Tell us about it and how it came to be.
I came for a 2-week break from Los Angeles. 2 weeks turned into a couple months, and went through the winter, and I was crashing on a friend's couch, and then started doing some work up here, and then I wandered into a meeting with some crew that was talking about doing sort of a film festival in Montana, and they wanted me to be a part of it. And I was like, if it's going to be something. Bozeman was at a real inflection point. Bozeman's gone through a lot in the last 20 years. I think 1992 was like one of those first real significant inflection points in terms of river runs through it, coming out, and you can draw a very linear path from the inflection point of real estate and tourism dollars and the people that came out here to start following that fly fishing dream. And then, of course, it happened again in the late 90s and early 2000s. And when I got invited to this meeting, and a few of these folks were like, hey, we want to do a film festival here. I'm like, why do something that every other community has? Let's do something different. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know. Let's cross-pollinate all these different industries and disciplines, and let's make it around mentorship. And they started asking me to lead the charge a little bit on that. And so the first few years of Hatch in 2004, 5, and 6, Moonlight Basin was our founding sponsor. We first thought that the mentorship platform would be top down, like seasoned veterans to this next generation.
Okay.
And we soon realized a couple years in that it was like top down, bottom up, and peer to peer. It was beautiful to see. It was like genuine curiosity going both ways.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of a shift moment where we're realizing that everyone has something to learn in the room from each other, regardless of age or discipline. And the more we started honing that and following that instinct was getting clearer on the cross-pollination of technology and architecture and entrepreneurship and science and storytelling and creativity, all these different otherwise siloed lanes. When you put them in a room, it helps everyone see things differently. You get bumped out of your echo chamber. So that's really where Hatch has started to take off. And now there's these kind of two main lanes of the convening around the summits and the deploying with Hatch Studios and the Impact Labs.
We'll be back to my conversation with Yarrow Kraner after this short break. A New Angle is proudly presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. This show does not happen without these pillars of our community, and I'm so grateful for their support and encouragement. And speaking of support, have you checked out our new website yet? anewanglepodcast.com. There you can support our show directly with a variety of subscription options. Subscribers get access to bonus episodes, additional segments, writings, and other benefits. So check it out at anewanglepodcast.com.
Hey, this is John Wicks from Def Charlie, and you are listening to A New Angle.
Welcome back to A New Angle. I'm speaking with Yarrow Kraner, founder of Hatch and champion of social networking for good. So you have 1 or 2 annual Hatch conferences. Let's maybe talk about those first, and then we'll get into the studios piece.
The mission statement of Hatch is to connect leaders and organizations to a global community to accelerate relationships and solutions to hatch a better world for all. And those words are pretty specific because the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 global goals that all nations came together and agreed upon, was rebranded from the Millennial Development Goals in 2015 to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Mm-hmm. There was a school of thought that, we would be much farther along by 2030 in solving this framework. And if the idea being that if you could map out all the problems in the world into a framework, we would have a better chance of being able to sequentially make progress on those solutions. The challenge being that a bunch of data came out recently around why there's not been more progress there. And that data showed that there's a lack of focus or nurturing of the relational aspects of systems change. And so when we say that Hatch accelerates relationships, we do that because we keep our convenings and our summits really small and intimate. It's a very curated ecosystem just by virtue of the curation and the process and the framework to unlock people from the inside out, systems change from the inside out.
How have you learned how to make choices about who you invite to your events?
One of the criteria is that we want good collaborators. Mm-hmm. We want people that ask thoughtful questions, that lean in and they're curious. We're looking for the experts that still have a sort of a childlike wonder and curiosity, that don't pretend to know all the answers. And that usually makes a good collaborator.
Yeah.
And second, I have this theory that people that are working on projects or intentions that are impacting more than just themselves operate at a different vibration or frequency. And so when you bring a bunch of people together that are working on behalf of a larger goal with potential funders, with entrepreneurs and business experts and people that know how to scale and people that know how to market, that cross-section needs this sort of diagonal swath of humanity. If there's a good idea in the room, you want all the ingredients present to be able to accelerate that idea.
Any other learnings from the events that you want to make sure listeners know about?
To hatch a better world, you must hatch your best self. And so there's inner outer work that we do. There's large scale systems mapping, but there's also individual unlocking and personal transformation. And we don't really lead with that. It's not really articulated in our invites. And I think a lot of leaders of today are like, hey, I've been there, done that, read the books, did the workshops. But we do things a little bit differently. And we also intertwine a ton of creativity and arts and music and culinary. And we create a really well-rounded experience for people to have these sort of slow unlocking. And then they get to take that back to their communities and businesses and so on. And so once people have come through that summit portal, that opens them up into the rest of the Hatch community, which has been built over 20 years. And then there's a whole series of activities. But the thing that I think a lot of people get really excited about, that I personally get really excited about, is Hatch Studios and the Impact Labs. And that's where we get to then point these superpowers, all these different eclectic minds and perspectives, almost like sunlight through a magnifying glass at these different systems challenges.
Let's maybe draw in an example of how the studios model makes it come to life.
One example was a couple years ago, we got engaged by one of the top 2 toy companies in the world. And in that engagement, we had pushed time out like a day and a half in this 2-day workshop and said, hey, recognize that you guys have the most, one of the top 2 most sophisticated distribution channels that get in toys to the hands of children in the world. Imagine if you had just a small division of your company that had a slightly different lens. What if you had a small division of your company that was getting toys of critical thinking and problem solving in the hands of future leaders?
Yeah.
using
Wow.
that same distribution channel. What would your company look like 35 years from now? Completely different arc. And so those are like moments of unlocking, because 2 months later they called a global town hall meeting, the CEO did, and rerouted a bunch of their talent to manifest that vision. A couple of years ago, one more example, there was a lot of increased awareness around the toxicity of microplastics being ground up in the ocean, evaporating, precipitating, ending up in our bodies and creating cancers and other diseases. And so in 2019, we convened some of the largest creators of plastics in the world with these previously adversarial relationships. So you had $300 billion of industry, Dow Chemical, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Johnson, et cetera, with a bunch of NGOs trying to shut them down, like Greenpeace, Social Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, for 4 days. And as you can imagine, like the stakes are high. It was like walking on eggshells for the first bit there. But the design challenge is like, is it possible to get all these incredibly talented leaders in their different sectors with very opposed viewpoints to zoom out and recognize that this is larger than their agenda or company policy? This is about a collective human challenge that affects and impacts everyone and their children. And so we went through a series of exercises to find all the aligned and shared values, at which point we had a whole map of the life cycle of plastics. We had 20 points in that map. We had an impact lab designated each one of those because there was an opportunity for full disruption and innovation. And 18 of those became funded and ended up leading to the signing of the Ocean Plastics Treaty by the UN a year and a half ago.
Wow.
And so we take those kind of examples as hope that two opposing forces can come together.
I'd love to talk about some of your other ventures. You recently launched or co-founded the Montana Festival. You had your first iteration in 2024. Talk about the Montana Festival. What is it all about?
Oh, yeah. I'm really inspired by the work that Pat Murphy sparked with Montana Festival, and invited myself and Jenny Graff and a couple other people to come together and build a little bit of a coalition around this initiative. And for me, the birthplace of Hatch is Bozeman, Montana, and it's gone on to, we have Hatch summits in Europe, Mexico, Panama, and so on. So when Patton reached out to me, I'd been missing more of the work in Montana. So it was like this perfect moment of re-engaging with the community that I'm from and the state that I love, and also creating these sort of inflow, outflow resource models where not only do we find all these beautiful pockets of incredibly inspiring entrepreneurs and business leaders in Montana, there's so many talented people in the state, but also connecting them to a larger network outside of the state. So bringing people from the coasts, from other parts of the world, architects from Denmark who have mastered like certain aspects of city planning, bringing those folks to Montana, having them fall in love with the people and the initiatives here, but also getting the opportunity to thought exchange and resource exchange with the people on the ground here. I mean, this is still one of the least populated states, but COVID had a big impact. It was one more shift on how rapidly this place is scaling and growing. And it's not happening everywhere in the state, but it's certainly happening in Bozeman and Billings and most of the largest cities. But how to manage that and how to jump ahead into the future and define what is aspirational for the communities of Montana, both large and small, and then reverse engineer how to get there and be really thoughtful, because we have a very unique opportunity. There's a lot of states that are so far out of the gates in population that they have a much harder time, being thoughtful about how they want to scale. We still have that opportunity here.
Yeah, opportunity, tremendous opportunity, but significant risk as well. It's not clear that we're going to do it right.
It comes back to where is Montana going and scaling, and are we doing it right, not doing it right? It starts with real conversation. It starts with having the right people at the table and working through a more facilitated process in which every perspective is valued and being heard, and then just a more thoughtful way of. Right now, there's one of the things I love about Pat Murphy and his vision for Montana Festival is that he's also been involved in a lot of kind of local, regional, city commission and planning meetings, and just observing how some of those functions don't work properly, as there were originally intended. I mean, people can show up to those meetings and vent, but the people that they're venting to by current law can't respond. They just have to sit there and listen. And so that's not a dialogue. And so therefore the people that are sitting there complaining don't have all the context, because that context doesn't have an efficient avenue of participation and onboarding for people to understand, like, these are the things that are being considered and, implemented. You don't see the whole picture yet, but there's a plan here. Or conversely, being able to offer some of those people in power sort of a free flow of, not a free flow, but like more efficient ways of seeing alternatives and solutions that they might not otherwise be privy to, that have happened in other communities around the country that have already been through similar things. There's a lot of cities and communities that have learned both how to do things right and how to not do things, because they learned the hard way. And some of those lessons we could benefit from not having to live through and lament later.
Yeah. One of the things I think we all benefit from is bringing good actors together, people with good faith, people who are smart, creative, and want to work together, want to listen to various viewpoints, etc. Bringing them together is our pathway forward. And you're doing that with Hatch Studios, Montana Festival, so many of your endeavors. It seems like it's all centered around trying to bring good people together to create solutions.
Yeah, it really is. And building and creating a container that values all the viewpoints and voices in the room. And it's not easy. There's a lot of different perspectives out there. But if you're not going to have a container in which everyone can have their voice heard, then that's just going to build resentment, and nothing's productive at that point.
No. If folks want to learn more about Hatch Studios, Montana Festival, all the good work that you do, Yarrow, where would you direct them?
Hatchexperience.org is the Hatch website, and there's an apply button there. There's a nominate lever. It's also, of course, a place to donate and support. Hatch is a nonprofit, and we have a next gen program, which I forgot to mention. It's a really beautiful program where we're bringing students from Montana to all the summits, and also whether they're within Montana or global. We had Hatch Montana Next Gen kids at Hatch Europe in Switzerland last year, and so on. And then, of course, the other website that I would invite people to go to is the montanafestival.org to learn more about the work that's happening there. And that the next Montana Festival is next May in 2025.
Super. Well, Yarrow Kraner, thanks for all the great work you do, and thanks for telling us about it today.
Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the invitation, and I look forward to finding a way in which you and I can collaborate a little bit.
I'd like that. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsors are First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Kelly Larson is our producer. Maddie Jordan is our production assistant. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. And Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.